It's finally time for our biggest upgrade yet. Yep, today we're putting a CPU in this thing. Stay tuned. This is either going to be spectacular or bomb miserably. We've upgraded this system about as far as we can go with the current platform. It's time to retire this FX processor and move to something more current. So today, we're going to be upgrading this system to a Zen 2 Ryzen. For this upgrade, we're going to stick with the e-waste tradition that we started this build with originally. So we're going to be using mostly used parts. We got a couple of new parts, but most of them are going to be used. To start out with, this is going to be based on the B450M motherboard by Asus. You can pick these things up used for about 40 bucks, and it should fit into this micro ATX case just fine. For a processor, we're going to be using the Ryzen 5 3500. This here is an OEM only processor. You could only buy these things in the OEM. So if you bought an HP or a Dell that had a Ryzen processor in it, this is probably the processor that it came with. These ones didn't actually come in a retail box like the 3600 did. And there's a few differences between this processor and a 3600. For one, this one isn't hyper-threaded. So it's a 6-core, 6-thread processor. Also, this one has half the L3 cache. It only has a 16 meg L3 cache instead of a 32 meg. Also, this one here has a boost clock of 4.1 gigahertz compared to the 3600's 4.2 gigahertz. This one here I picked up for about 150 bucks on eBay. And other than that, all the other specs match the 3600. It has the same base clock. It's still based on the 7 nanometer process, and it's still a Zen 2 based processor. So we should be able to take advantage of the good IPC. And honestly, when it comes to the thread count of 6 versus 12 threads, I don't think that's going to affect gaming too much. So the fact that it's not hyper-threaded, I don't find to be too big of a deal. But we're going to find out. The reason why I went with this processor is because at the time I bought it, the Ryzen 5 3600s were going for about 250 bucks. So it was about $100 savings. However, I've seen them come down a little bit since then. So you might actually be able to get a good deal on a 3600 if you get it at the right time. For a cooler, I'm actually just going to repurpose an AMD Wrath Stealth cooler. This is the cooler that typically comes with the Ryzen 5 3600. This is actually the cooler that came with my Ryzen 5, but mine's water cooled. So I don't have much need for a cooler, so we're going to use this in the build. You can usually pick these things up for about 15 bucks on eBay. And for the memory, we're going to be using G-Skill's Ripjaw 3200. This is an 8 gig kit of dual channel RAM, and the reason why I bought a new kit is because Ryzens have a tendency to be temperamental with memory support. So I didn't want to have to deal with finding used sticks that would function correctly, and I know this stuff works. I use this stuff with Ryzens all the time, and the G-Skill Ripjaw works great in a Ryzen processor. So that's why I went with this. I picked this stuff up for about $55 on Newegg. So based on that, you can see our total is about $260 for this entire upgrade. We saved about 100 bucks on the processor by going with the 3500, and the fact that we used parts kind of brings it down quite a bit. So this actually is a really cheap upgrade, and hopefully it's going to give us a huge boost in performance. But to find out, we're going to have to put it all together and then run some tests on it. So let's do that right now. All right, now that we have it built, we have to see how well it performs. And I can tell you one thing, my first impressions is that it runs way faster in Windows. But of course it does, because honestly, it's essentially a new computer now. And another bonus is I didn't even have to reactivate Windows, which I wouldn't expect that if you're doing this upgrade, but it is a nice bonus. However, performance in Windows isn't really what we were going for on this. It needs to perform better in games, and for that, we're gonna have to take a look at the benchmarks. So let's take a look at those now. First game we're going to look at today is Black Mesa, and as before, the settings are exactly the same at 1920 by 1080, anti-aliasing is turned on, and the settings are set to mostly high. Originally, the FX gave us 99 FPS with a 1% low of 67. However, the Ryzen, in its stock form without overclocking the GPU, gave us 103.2, so that's a pretty good bump. However, when we overclocked the GPU, it gave us 110.5 FPS with an 83.21% low. And this is actually a pretty good jump. Unfortunately, I had to change the overclock because while it was stable on the FX, it wasn't stable on the Ryzen. The core was fine at 110 megahertz overstock. However, the 140 megahertz overstock on the memory was just not stable. It was causing games to crash. So I had to bring that down to 120. So all of the overclocks in this video are going to be based on the 120 megahertz memory overclock instead of the 140. But keep in mind how much better the Ryzen performed even with an overclock that was a little bit slower than the FX. The next game we're looking at today is CSGO, and as before, the settings were 1920 by 1080 with anti-aliasing turned on and mostly high texture settings. On the FX, we got 81 FPS with a 43.31% low. I thought that was pretty good. However, the Ryzen completely demolished it with 155 FPS and 1% low. However, not to stop there, I went ahead and overclocked the GPU and we got 156.2 FPS with a 90.71% low. Honestly, I am blown away with how smooth this game plays on this Ryzen. This one right here gave us a huge performance increase and I'm really happy with the results. It's definitely worth the upgrade. The next game we're looking at is GTA 5. As before, the settings on this one were 1920 by 1080, DirectX 11, and it was set to mostly high settings with anti-aliasing turned on. The FX processor gave us 49 FPS with a 36.51% low. However, the Ryzen jumped us up to 54.3 FPS with a 45.31% low. And not to be undone, we went ahead and overclocked the GPU again and got 59.6 FPS with a 48.31% low. So with the GPU overclocked, we were able to get over 10 frames a second better in GTA on the Ryzen than we were with the FX. This game not only continues to look better, but also run way smoother every upgrade we do. But I think this is the biggest improvement we've gotten in this game to date. As we've talked of in the past, this game is really CPU dependent, so giving it a lot more processing power definitely gave this one a jump in performance. The next game we're going to be looking at is Red Dead Redemption 2. The settings on this game were set to 1280 by 720. I used the favor performance preset and I set it all the way to the highest in favor performance. And we're also using the Vulkan engine to render this game. On the FX, we got 28.4 FPS with a 19.61% low. Now, this is pretty dismal and it makes it really hard to play this game at 28 frames a second. However, just going to the Ryzen, it jumped us up to 43.1 FPS with 34.41% low. This is a huge improvement. However, we went ahead and tried it overclocked, so we overclocked the GPU and it gave us 44.8 FPS with 35.81% low. This is a huge improvement. It's almost doubled the FPS simply going to the Ryzen processor. So I think this also has a lot to do with the open world games. Just like how GTA benefits from a faster processor, I think this game does too. I mean, obviously this game does. I mean, look at the improvement that we made in it. I think the IPC for the Ryzen processor really helped this game out. And I'm really looking forward to doing future upgrades to see how much better we can get this game to run. Would be nice to see if we can get it over 60 frames a second, but one of these days we'll get it there. As with the other videos related to this system, we went ahead and ran Heaven again. And as before, Heaven was set to 1600 by 900 with the Extreme preset. The FX scored 28.8 FPS with a score of 726. And then jumping to the Ryzen, we got 29.1 with a score of 733. Now this isn't a huge jump, but this game right here is tailored to push on the graphics card. And I don't really think the rest of the hardware in the system has as much to do with how this benchmark performs, because this benchmark is specifically tailored to test the graphics card. With the GPU overclocked, we were able to get 31.2 FPS. This gave us a score of 785. And honestly, this is the best score we've had to date in this benchmark, so I think we're doing pretty good. So, as you can see from the benchmarks, this thing walked all over that FX. This was a great upgrade, and at $260, this definitely gave us the biggest boost in performance that we've had yet. And Unfortunately, it was also the biggest upgrade we've had yet. However, even with the 750 Ti in this thing's actually becoming a really good gaming system. However, I think there's a graphics card in this system's future, and unfortunately, that's going to be a problem, but it's a problem for another video. If you have any ideas on what you would do to make this system faster, then please sound off in the comments and let me know. Your idea might become the next video. If this video was helpful to you, then please like this video. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And hit that bell icon so you can be notified of future videos. I post a new video every week. And hey, before you go, check out a couple of these videos. Have a great day.